Hello, Internet, and welcome to Deleted Scenes. It's good to be here with you. If you did morning prayer with us, you'll notice there's a change of scenery. I'm back at home. Monday mornings, I'm in the church building. And yeah, it's good to be here with you. Um, so there's one little thing I can address before we get into deleted scenes. Actually, first of all, fair warning. This is the reality of pastoring and parenting and broadcasting in COVID. James is asleep, my son, and that means that mom is using this as an opportunity to go grocery shopping. And that also means that I am responsible for watching him. And so if he wakes up, I'm going to have to go get him. And you guys are just going to have to wait because that's how it works. So fair warning in case that happens. I hope he sleeps longer than that because he needs a longer nap than that, but it might happen. So, yesterday, the sermon was the first in a series that we're doing on the exile and what it looks like for God's people to live and act in exile and to move forward in God's plan. And because things don't always go according to our plans, and so when things go out of our control or out of our not according to plan, we need to know how we follow God's plan. Evidence of things not going according to plan was a slight editing problem with yesterday's service that was kind of funny. At the very end, I neglected to cut out a couple of outtakes of the benediction. And I got a couple comments about the fact that I clapped really loud. And that actually was for a particular reason. You know, in movies, when you see movies about making movies, they do that clicker thing. And it makes a sound. The reason for that is because they record video in one place and audio in another place. So they need a visual thing that makes a sharp noise that they can sync up with. And I'm doing the same thing. I had this on a boom mic over my head, and I was synchronizing. So little trivia for you there. But anyway, let's move on and talk about the sermon. So we were talking about the exile, and one of the things I mentioned during the sermon was that the length of the exile had special significance. The fact that it was 70 years. And so today, what I'm going to talk about is the significance that time period has, because it actually can give us some information about what God was doing at the time and the purpose of the exile, because numbers often have an important role to play in what's going on in a particular Bible story. So we're going to count off five. We're going to count off five five meanings for the number 70 in this story. Okay, so reason number one is literally that's just how long they were in exile. It took 70 years. Now the thing is, while that is true, there was literally 70 years. The fact is that the exile was not quite as simple as here's the day they went into exile and here's the day they came back. It was actually a lot like the way the coronavirus shutdowns have been, how they started and how they're most likely going to end, which is that there were like, when did the shutdown start? Well, you could pick a few different points when it might have started because it started in a few different stages and in different places. When will the shutdown end? Well, most likely it's going to end in a gradual way in different places. And so you could choose the date when the meeting people are first allowed to go back into stores, or when businesses reopen. You could pick the day when the last restrictions are released. You could pick the day when the last patient is released. You know, you could pick a lot of different dates. And so there's more meaning in the 70 years than simply the idea that it was literally 70 years, because you could truthfully, accurately make the argument for multiple different time frames depending on how you mark it. Typically, the way it's marked is the end of the exile is when they start building the temple. But people had already gone back from exile for a while before that. So anyway, the point is that there is clearly more significance to the time period of 70 years than just the fact that that is literally how long it took. They chose to measure it in a way that resulted in 70 years. So why would they choose 70 years? Well, here's reason number 2. The number 7 is a very important number in the Bible. It does not take very long for you to discover that the number 7 is important in the Bible. It shapes our life today because we have a 7-day week that comes from scriptural tradition. And so 7 is a highly significant number, and it means completeness. When there's 7 of something, it's complete. And so you'll notice that these numbers come up a lot in prophecies, that there are 7 of something. In Revelation, you have 7 seals and 7 bowls and 7 trumpets, and there's 7 spirits of God, and there's 7 churches, and there's 7 all over the place. So 70 is a bigger 7, right? So it means a big, complete time. So to say it's 70 years, 70 would be more meaningful than to measure it and say it's 80 years or 74 or 68, right? 70 is a more meaningful number because it's a long time and it's a complete time. Reason number 3 why 70 is important is because 70 is in Scripture, it is the traditional limit set on human life. That the scriptural life expectancy is 70 years. That was considered to be a normal full life. There are places, like in Psalm 90 verse 10, it says, "Our days may come to 70 years, or 80 if our strength endures, yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away." Not exactly an uplifting verse, but it gives you that connection that 70 years was considered a full lifetime. And they didn't have statistics back then, but that was the life expectancy for them, was 70 years. So when God says you're going to be in exile 70 years, he's saying it's a full lifetime. If it's 70 years, then that means nobody who's alive now is coming back, essentially, or basically. It's the minimum amount of time that would be required for everyone who goes into exile to die. Obviously not exactly, because there are probably people who lived longer than that, and there's actually a place in Ezra and Nehemiah where it says that there were people who remembered the old temple when they laid the foundation for the new temple. But it's basically, symbolically, the number is telling people you're going to be here for the rest of your lives. You're going to spend your entire lifetime in exile, and your kids, your grandkids are the ones who are coming back. And that's really important when the other prophets have been saying you're coming back in 2 years. 2 years is a hop, skip, and a jump in a way. That means I can pick my business back up. I can pick my life back up. It's no big deal. On the other hand, 70 years means that I'm not coming home. No way. It's not going to happen. I just realized I've been looking at the microphone instead of the camera. So if you're wondering why I'm staring off to the side here, I've just been looking at the microphone for some reason. All right. Anyway, number 4. Here's something really interesting. There is a sense in which 70 years is mathematically it's the mathematically appropriate punishment for what the Jews have done. And here's the thing. So the Jews have been in the land. If you look in the book of Chronicles and you add together the amount of time that people are in the land, the people of Israel are in the land, it's about 490 years from until they're exiled. Okay, 490 years. Now, here's the thing: is that every 7 years, the law of Moses tells them to take a year off. They're supposed to have a Sabbath year, right? So you work 6 days and you take a day off. That's a Sabbath. Then you have the Sabbath year, where you work 6 years and then you take a whole year off. See, here's an interesting thing. People talk about keeping the Sabbath, and they act as if, and there's a lot of debate going on about practicing Sabbath and what Sabbath means. And the fact is that Sabbath means more than just not working 1 day a week. And that tends to be how we practice it. And when people get into fights about what it looks like to be a Sabbath keeper, and it means not working on 1 day a week. Well, that's not the extent of it. Keeping Sabbath was a whole calendar and a whole way of marking your life, because you took up 1 day off a week, you took 1 year off every 7 years, and then you took an extra Sabbath year off every 49 years. So every 7 Sabbaths, every 7 Sabbath week years, or every 7th Sabbath year, you'd take an additional Sabbath year, and that was called the Jubilee year. And that's when you freed all the slaves, and all the land went back to the original owners, and all this stuff. And it was this amazing day of liberation. And interestingly enough, we have no record that the Jews ever observed a Sabbath year. They were supposed to take the year off, and a big part of that was that they were supposed to give the land a break. They were not supposed to farm. The land was supposed to get rest, because the land didn't belong to them. They were renting it from God, and God wanted them to let the land rest. So they've been in the land for 490 years when they're sent into exile, and all that time they're supposed to be taking a Sabbath year off, and they haven't been doing it. How long? Or if they're there for 490 years, and every 7 years is supposed to be a Sabbath, how many Sabbath years did they miss? I know, it sounds like an elementary school math problem. 490 years divided by 7, it's 70. So they have missed 70 Sabbath years. That means that the land has missed 70 years of rest. And so when they go into exile, one of the ways that God phrases it, he says, I'm going to give the land rest from your sin. So how much time does he give the land? Well, he gives it 70 years, because that's how much they owe. They owe the land 70 years of rest. And so that's a very important connection, and it shows God's mindset, what he's focused on, what's important to him when he sends these people into exile, is that he is enforcing the law that they agreed to. He's enforcing this custom that is supposed to give the land rest, and he cares about that. He cares about the land getting rest. He cares about the fact that the slaves haven't been freed. He cares about all of this, and so he is going to bring those Sabbath years one way or the other. Now, there's a fifth way that the number 70 is used, and that is in the book of Daniel. So Jeremiah predicts that they will go into exile for 70 years at the start of the exile. So a while later, Daniel, who went into exile as a boy, he spends his whole life in exile, and he's very old, and in Daniel 9, he fasts and he prays, and he basically asks God, okay, when is this 70 years going to end? Let's see. Yeah, so in Daniel 9, it says, in the first year of Darius, son of Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, by descent a Mede, who was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, perceived in the books the number of years that, according to the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet, must pass before the end of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. So he read the book of Jeremiah and saw the promise that it would be 70 years. And 70 years is almost up. And so he prays to God, and he asks God, hey, or he confesses to God the sins of his people, and he begs God to come back, and he says, tell me, what is the rest of your plan going to look like? What's it going to look like when you bring us back? And God responds. He sends an angel, Gabriel, and this is what Gabriel says. 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. 70 weeks. Okay, important thing to know here is in Hebrew the word week is the word for seven. So it's seven. It could be 70 weeks or 77s. Basically, what he's saying is it's 70 weeks of years. It's not 70 years anymore. It's 70 weeks worth of years. And essentially what's happening is Daniel says, okay, the time's almost up, God, so what's the plan? And God says, well, there's more that needs to be done to deal with Israel's sin. 70 years wasn't actually enough to deal with all of the problems caused by Israel and to make clear what kind of God I am and how I feel about sin. And so more time is needed. And so it's not going to be 70 years. It's going to be 70 times 7 years. Which is, we're just doing the same math from before, but the other way, 490 years. And now there's a whole rabbit hole of going into how to calculate the 490 years and what it leads to and all of that. But basically, it puts you in the time of Jesus. And so, because what we find out is that some of the people come back from exile, but not all the people do. And it's a small group that comes back from exile, and they don't come back and take over the promised land. Persia is still in charge, and after Persia, it's the Greeks. And after the Greeks, it's the Seleucids. And after the Seleucids, there's this little time when the Jews rule themselves, but it's the wrong tribe that's in charge, and things go terribly, and then the Romans take over. And so the prophecy of Daniel takes this 70 years and multiplies it by 7 and says there's more time that's needed. And we're going to end up fulfilling this in the time of Jesus. And this is one of the reasons why there were so many people claiming to be the Messiah around the first century, around the time that Jesus came. We see a rash of people claiming to be the Messiah. It's because the Jews knew that it was about time. They knew that it was about time for Jesus to come back. And so the 70 years promise actually connects all the way forward into the time of Jesus. And then when Jesus comes and preaches the good news, he quotes from the book of Isaiah. In Luke chapter 4, he starts his ministry by quoting from Isaiah, and he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Jesus says that he is fulfilling the prophecy of Isaiah, which is to bring the year of the Lord's favor. What is the year of the Lord's favor? It's the Jubilee. It's this year that is built into the Jewish calendar that the Jews had not actually celebrated, that set all the captives free and gave everybody their land back and their life back and restored everything to God's good design. And so when Jesus comes and begins his ministry, he's declaring the end to all these cycles of 7, or the fulfillment of all these cycles of 7. That has been, so you have God gives the land rest for 7 years. The exile ends up lasting for 490 years, but that final Jubilee happens through Jesus. And for somebody who is steeped in the Old Testament and steeped in the law, for Jews who were reading the New Testament, that would have rung out like a bell. They would have known all of that, and it would have been this hugely significant message to them, because they had been looking for the year of the Lord's favor to come all along. So all of that is wrapped up simply in the numbers that are going on in this book. Now, there are a lot of other things you can do with those numbers, and some things that I personally do not believe to be at all scriptural, mainly with dispensationalism and trying to take out 1 week and say that last week hasn't happened yet. It actually gets pushed forward until after the rapture, which the rapture isn't really in the Bible. That's something that was developed about 100 years ago. And then that last week is moved up into the future, and I just do not see any scriptural basis for that. I don't think that numbers are supposed to be that complex. Numbers in Scripture seem to be symbols, not some deep math of the universe to tell you when Jesus is coming back or something like that, but they're symbols. And so the 7 symbolizes completeness. The 70 symbolizes a long time, a lifetime, and justice of restoring all of those lost years of rest for the land. So that's what I have to add. That's what got deleted from the sermon this last week. The next sermon is going to be on the story of Joseph and his exile in Egypt, which is one of the, not only is it an incredibly meaningful story in Scripture, and it tells us a lot about what God is doing and how we should live in exile, it also happens to be one of the best just stories ever told in terms of plot and structure and climax and all that. It's a brilliant story. We're only going to be able to do the highlights, but I'm really excited to talk about the story of Joseph and his exile and how we can learn how to live in exile ourselves. So I look forward to sharing the sermon with you on Sunday. We'll be here doing our morning prayer at 8:30 each weekday morning throughout the rest of the week, and we'd love for you to be a part of all of that. Stay healthy, stay hopeful, go in peace to love and serve the Lord.